Good afternoon. My name is Josef Sorett. I'm Assistant Professor of Religion and African American Studies at Columbia University, member of the AAR's Committee for the Public Understanding of Religion. It's my pleasure to sit down with Eddie Glaude, who is the William S. Todd Professor of Religion and African American Studies, as well as the new chair of the newly formed Department of African American Studies at Princeton University, as well as Vice President of the American Academy of Religion, will become president in 2 years, right? 2017, is that right?
Come Sunday, it'll be President-elect.
President-elect, yes, right. The end of your tenure as VP.
Right.
So it's great to sit down with you, Eddie. We just want to talk about a broad set of questions about the importance of engaging questions of religion in the public sphere. And so maybe we'll just start there with the broadest sense. So much of what we're trained to do and what we do as academics is talk to one another about a history of debates around religious ideas and practices. Why then is it, and do you think it's important, or maybe it's not, in your estimation, to engage these questions as it relates to religion on a broader horizon and with other publics?
Well, I think that's a good question. I mean, there are different kinds of competencies, right? So different set of expectations when we're talking about people who are talking with each other who study the study of religion.
Yep.
And going back all the way to that J.Z. Smith distinction between the study of religion and the practice of religion.
Yes.
So it's different arenas. Requiring different kinds of skill sets, different excellences and vices, different kinds of traps, different kinds of joys. But what we do know is that religion is incredibly difficult as the concept may be, or the category, as porous as the category is, continues to animate the life choices of so many people throughout the country and the world. And so the way in which we can contribute to a broader understanding of religious practice, the vast diversity of the kinds of religious claims that affect policy, that motivate people to do great things and to do harmful things. The way in which we can contribute to a discussion of the role of religious institutions in addressing, at least from my vantage point, some of the more pressing issues that define our life world. We can bring our skill set, a skill set that has been cultivated under different conditions. We can engage in the translation work to bring that skill set to bear in a different environment, among different publics. And for me, it's always been, what as incredibly difficult as the concept is, right, it's always going to take us somewhere.
Yeah.
And the question is, wherever it takes us, let's pay attention to what it's singling out and what is it keeping, and try to be mindful of what it's keeping from view. And we can bring our skill sets to bear in these various publics and hopefully help us move about.
So maybe I'm thinking we should get to what some of those publics are, like what may be some of the more important times or moments that you see on the horizon for engaging these questions of religion in the public square. But maybe before going there, turn to some of the challenges that you imagine, or that are in some way familiar. So I guess as scholar of both religion and African American studies, something we share. There's a sort of tradition within African American studies of thinking of scholarship in activism or scholarship in public engagement, that when you translate on that to the study of religion, raises sort of the question of theory and practice, has a particular resonance as it relates to the sort of tensions between theology and religious studies, or studying the J.Z. Smith distinction between practicing and studying. So I wonder if there are particular challenges or problems, if I were to be melodramatic, perils, if you will, to the kind of public work we might do as scholars of religion.
Oh, absolutely, right. I mean, in some place, and I'm not trying to suggest that there's no nuance or no complexity among the various groups that hold religious commitments and participate in religious communities, but the status of belief, of insider, outsider, the delicate way in which we have to handle the truth claims of particular communities, the ways in which we orient ourselves to the social function of those communities, in which those commitments are circulating, and they're not circulating in any kind of functionalist way. They're meaningful They help people understand their relationship to the world. They anchor their lives, and you just can't walk up in there willy-nilly with all of our skill sets. But at the same time, we can't overly privilege their voice and their insight. Right? We have to have a critical relation to the communities that we find ourselves in. So sometimes we kind of go to the extreme, right? The scholarly voice is authorized and given superordinate consideration, and then we move to the other extreme where it's just kind of a confessional enterprise, where folks are just trying to just engage in ethnographic work. We just need to let these folks speak.
Yep.
And so we have to find that delicate balance. I wrote a piece at the when the Huffington Post religion page debuted. I wrote the piece, "The Black Church is Dead,"
Yep.
and rhetorically, that sort of formulation has a long history.
Yeah, absolutely.
In African American, religious studies. Long history in African American letters.
Yep.
Right, a kind of calling Black religious institutions to task about what is its role and function. And I found myself in the basements of churches outside of cameras, having these intense discussions with, congregations, lay persons and pastors, and trying to figure out what would be, how might my critique, my provocation, evidence itself in the very ways in which they bore witness, and the very ways in which they. So I was taken to the altar, and it wasn't always for prayer.
Yeah.
As you know,
Absolutely.
it wasn't always for prayer. But you have to find yourself navigating and negotiating those tensions.
Yeah.
Right. And the only operative value, right, when doing this sort of work, at least two, right, is according respect, right, and dignity to the people with whom we engage, and an openness, right, to hear and listen and to be taken, right, where the sounds and the words and the practices take you. Right. So according respect and dignity to the folks that we're talking with, and some of the folks with whom we live, and being an openness, right, to what can come into view.
Yeah.
So that in other words, you can't step in there dogmatic and with all of your assumptions already intact.
Right. Be as open to the subjects intervening on the claims you're making as to you shifting theirs. Yeah. What strikes me was extraordinary about that exchange around Black church life and death.
Yeah.
It sort of confirms the ways in the sort of the porousness between theory and practice,
Right.
because there was a whole set of practitioners very invested in theorizing the object of the Black church, which we spend a lot of our time. But moving from those sort of theoretical conversations,
Right.
maybe I could invite you to lay out what you see as some of the more concrete challenges or problems that it might be important for us to be thinking about.
Absolutely.
Maybe at the intersection of religion and race, or more broadly. What are the sort of real I think calls for.
We see it very clearly in the country today. When we look at the way in which U.S. foreign policy has engaged the Middle East, when we think about the very conceptions of religion that inform how they're interacting with the Shia or a Sunni in the context of Saudi Arabia and Iraq and Iran, we need people who have expertise to help kind of tease out some of the biases and assumptions that are informing the very understanding of religion that's shaping foreign policy that's impacting our life world, right? So that's just one example. Another example would be the way in which we have to have religion scholars, and we just did this here at the 2015 AAR. We just released a statement on behalf of the membership around the anti-Muslim rhetoric that is really defining our current political climate, Muslim ID databases and the like. And it seems to me that given our skill set and what we do, we can intervene in a very reasonable way in that conversation, not only lifting up the values of the nation, but lifting up the values of those of us who are committed to the study of this incredibly rich and complex and varied subject matter. So just at the level of social life, how is religion animating political choices and social arrangements? But we also can begin to think about the ways in which religion evidences itself in a society that's been defined by mass incarceration. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
How do we think about not only religion in the context of prisons where large numbers of folks live, but also how do we kind of invoke our scholarly practice in this moment where we're locking up people at alarming rates and responding to what that means for us as a society. And so this brings me to a point where I kind of go beyond just simply those of us who study religion, and that is to say, I think we are in a field where these normative considerations are important, and that we can participate in a vigorous way in a conversation about who we take ourselves to be as a nation, what sorts of values ought to animate, right, the way we live our lives. And we should be participating in that discussion vigorously. Right? Understanding that the AAR is as messy and as complicated as the U.S. generally.
Yeah.
But we can still be in that conversation.
Right, right. And I know we're winding down.
Yeah.
And I did want to, but I think of here, especially also with your last point around mass incarceration, highlights the ways in which race and religion are always entangled.
Yes.
And so you sort of do a lot of work on thinking at the intersection of race in American democracy, or we think of the movement for Black Lives, or what have you. I wonder, and as you're gearing up for future projects and to serve as AAR president, where you see questions of race more broadly animating how we as a guild address religion in the public square.
Well, I've learned this from your work, the very ways in which, religion produces racial meanings, and the very ways in which racial realities produce religious meanings, right? The kind of interrelation between these categories. Yeah. So I've learned so much from reading what you've produced. And in my own work, the theme for my presidential year will be religion and the most vulnerable. Okay. Right? Getting us to move, to think about the various ways in which religion addresses, produces, responds to the conditions in which populations, groups find themselves not only on the margins, but oftentimes occupying non-person status, right? And what follows from that. Yeah. And not only speaking to concrete examples of that, but what does it mean to locate the study of religion there and then move out, right, as opposed to beginning at the center. And so I think it opens up a number of interesting scholarly pathways, but it also helps us speak directly to the world that we inhabit. I mean, the short end of it all is that these are dark times. It just happens to be our time. Yeah. And so we have to bring the best of our skill set to bear on trying to bring a little light in the midst of all of this darkness, because it doesn't look like it's going to change anytime soon.
Wow. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Always pleasure.
Always good, Doc.